Resolute Square.
There was also maintained what was called an enemies list, which is rather extensive and continually being updated.
Democrats want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
No, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
I'm Rick Wilson, and this is The Enemies List. Joining us today on The Enemies List is Ro Khanna. He is one of the smartest members of Congress when it comes to tech regulation and the impact of tech on our politics, on our economy, and on our country. And we're so delighted he's with us today because I want to ask him some questions that I am just not smart enough to understand the implications of yet. And I think a lot of people will appreciate learning more about where we're going with big tech, the emergence and consequences of AI. And with that, Ro Khanna, welcome to The Enemies List. Thank you so much for joining us. And I wanted to start out with the question that seems to be consuming a lot of people in the tech space right now. What's the direction right now of the emergent AI industry, and what are the upsides, downsides, economic pluses and minuses in your mind? Where do you see it heading? I know that's a very broad question, but I think it's something that a lot of people are focused on right now.
Well, first of all, Rick, thank you for having me. Thank you for your advocacy for democracy and your voice on social media, as well as on a broader framework, which actually is a good place to start. The technology by itself is relatively neutral and can amplify good voices like yours and bad voices. And our challenge is, how do we make sure the technology is doing good for society and our country? I think when it comes to AI, we should make a distinction between two types of AI. There is the current form of AI, which is machine learning, which in a simplistic way, think of it basically as autocomplete. You know how when you're doing a search on Google, it figures out what the best search is, or if you're writing an email, sometimes it can complete the sentence. Machine learning in a complex way is just taking a lot of data, figuring out a pattern, and saying, okay, this is the next iteration of that pattern. There's the second issue of AI, which is general intelligence. And we're at least AGI. And we're at least 5 to 10 years away from that. And there's a huge philosophical debate of, is that even possible for machines to approximate human learning? But I think what's relevant is to focus right now on what we are doing, which is machine learning. And then you look at, okay, what are the benefits or not benefits of it? Let me talk briefly about some of the benefits. I was at a White Rabbit, a company near my district, and what they do is they use this AI to look at mammograms. And it turns out when you have a radiologist that uses AI for mammograms, you get a lot of improvement both in detecting a positive, but the actual benefit is if you have a negative, it's easier to certify that it's a negative. And so many women who come in, they get peace of mind easier and cheaper than having to wait a long time, weeks, before figuring out whether they're positive or negative for breast cancer. That's an example of a positive use of AI. Another positive use of AI is, let's say you have a kid in school and you want to know what the best curriculum is. Well, they can take a lot of data and figure out, maybe your kid needs a little bit more work in this kind of math or this kind of reading, and you can really customize the program. What are the negatives? Take a very basic case, pornography. I mean, now you can have victimless pornography. And I think actually over the next 6 months, that's going to be one of the biggest challenges in terms of a practical problem. And of course, there are issues of if you have garbage data into an AI program, you're going to have garbage outcomes. So those are a few things off the top of my head.
Yeah, I recently went into a rabbit hole about poisoned LLMs and the data sets that they now have to sort of like start to certify their data sets before they do this, because there is so much misinformation out there already. You don't want to feed into these AI models, garbage. You don't want to feed into, anti-vax stuff or whatever or anti-climate stuff that's just completely wrong, because you'll get a terrible outcome. A lot of folks are worried, I think, in the economy right now that AI could be the next wave of an economic disruption. When globalization came up and when automation and technology came up, there was this sort of wrenching dislocation, especially in the industrial American Midwest. And there's this fear now that AI, as it develops and improves, will start to have a more white collar impact on things like CPAs and lawyers and HR people and all these area customer service, all these areas that are more or less white collar jobs. What do you think the timeline is on that? I feel like we could be in for a shock sooner than later. I don't think it takes AGI to replace some of those sort of white collar, college educated jobs in the current economy.
Well, first of all, I think the country made a colossal mistake by allowing the hollowing out of the industrial Midwest, and we didn't have to
absolutely.
do that. I was in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and Lordstown just a couple of weeks ago. The fact that of the top 15 steel companies in the world, not a single one is the United States, and 9 of them are in China, was not inevitable. It was a colossal failure of American leadership for 40 years. And we can reverse that. Now, I call it an economic patriotism. The president has started to do that. I believe that, so the question about what's going to be displaced and not, I think is in part a question of policy. Right now, here is the advantage of AI, but AI actually should make it that you don't have to be really good at coding or a computer whiz to be able to use technology. When you had the power loom, for example, in the Industrial Revolution, and Paul Krugman writes about this, initially the people who used to know how to use the power loom, they got a ton of money. Once the power loom became easy, everyone was able to make money. In some ways, AI could do that to the valley. Right now, the computer whizzes are making a lot of money. If AI makes it that you and I, anyone could use this technology, you could have it actually augment the experience. Now, do I think there's going to be mass automation? I don't. And here's why. I could be wrong, but here's why I don't think that. When you go into a CVS and you buy something and you have that auto checkout lane, how many times you have to ask a representative to say, oh, the credit card, they don't take my credit card. I don't know this. I don't know the right price, right? So the question is, how do we use this technology in a way that is a tool that people can use to augment their experience? And I think that requires 2 things. It requires us having much more technology proficiency, technology understanding from K through 12 and beyond. Whatever you want to do, you're going to need to understand machines, whether you want to be a machinist or whether you want to be someone who's a journalist or someone who has a podcast. And the second thing is we need to have the worker perspective in developing what the appropriate use of technology is. And if we do both, we could actually see, but AI could bring a lot of the manufacturing here back. It could create new jobs. And I think a lot of it's policy.
I spoke to some guys over about a week ago who are doing some aviation stuff. And it's like some of these tools are actually allowing them to start doing things that they would have ordinarily had to either outsource or would have taken like a staff of 20 engineers to do. And now they're being able to validate some of these test results and things. I think you're right. I think there is an economic lever there where it can be a real unlock for a lot of prosperity in the economy. But one of the things that I think that I certainly as a political guy am concerned about, I was ahead of myself in 2019 when I wrote my second book, and I said, we're going to have a wave of deep fakes in the 2020 election that is going to surprise you. We didn't. But I don't think we're going to dodge that bullet in this election. What do you think of the implications of some of the stuff some of the deep fake materials? In fact, somebody did a deep fake of me the other day, a voice deep fake of me, a friend, not somebody who was, doing something malicious, but it was kind of surprising. It was kind of like very on fidelity. What do you think the political implications of some of that rising ability to do deep fakes, both visual and audio, are going to have on this election?
I'm concerned. That's actually one of the biggest concerns I have, because as you know better than me, Rick, we're in such a polarized nation that a few percent can really swing an election. If we were in a place where presidents were winning with 55, 60% of the vote, it'd be very different. Or senators were winning, which we were at one point, FDR, Reagan.
Yeah,
but we're in a place where there are a few 100,000 votes that are going to determine these key states and vote for the Senate and the presidency. And if you have a deep fake, let's say a deep fake about a health scare or a deep fake about a scandal, and even if we all figure it out 2 days later, what is the damage that's been done to the electoral process of 2 days of a rumor? I mean, we already know without the deep fakes, we've had totally fake rumors influencing the outcome of elections.
100%.
And I don't think we have a good thing. One of the things I pushed for in public settings is, do we have a system where the president and senior leadership of this country can assure people that when they're speaking, it's them and it's not someone else? And how can they do that within 30 seconds or within a timeline? And how are we communicating that, whether it's the New York Times or Fox News, that what they're putting out is actually the news agencies? I don't think we've done enough of our due diligence on the information flow, the authentication of the information flow to the American public.
I think that's a really good and frankly terrifying point. Right now, we still have had this long-running problem in DC where, and I agree with you when you said that, like, the European model is not the regulatory model for American tech. It doesn't quite fit the cultures and the infrastructure. But I think a growing number of Americans are concerned about the untrammeled power of some of the tech firms that are out there to alter the debate, to alter the economy, to control sectors of the economy, essentially with monopoly or near monopoly power. So talk to me a little bit about where you see the future of tech regulation. Is antitrust a part of that, or are we going to try to do it more piecemeal? Because I think there are good actors and bad actors in the Valley and in the tech space. But I do know that Americans are increasingly sort of on edge about it.
I agree with you. Let me place 4 places briefly of what we should be doing. One, on AI, we should create an AI regulatory body like the FDA.
FDA, FTC, sure.
FTC. What I say is we have the best drugs in the world. And I'm not always a fan of the pharmaceutical industry, but we have the best drugs partly because we have brilliant people inventing these, partly because we've got the best agency, which is the FDA, that has high standards. Do that for AI. Mm-hmm. Second, let's all agree on the kids. The fact is, when you look at social media, it's causing depression, it's causing suicide, it's causing 100%. Eating disorder. With young people, this should be bipartisan. How do you have a product that is having young, particularly teenage girls, have depression and even suicidal thoughts and have no regulation? We need to regulate the use of social media in kids so it's not your worst experience in junior high on steroids, which is really what it is right now and for many people. Mm-hmm. Third, have an internet bill of rights. Give people, you own your data, you should have certain rights. I've been calling for this since I got elected to Congress. Sure. Still haven't done it. Fourth, antitrust is a part of this. And Senator Klobuchar had a thoughtful approach, which I thought was reasonable. I would have supported, which basically means platforms shouldn't be able to advantage themselves and need to have a fair, open process of giving everyone a chance to compete. But the last point, right, which often doesn't get mentioned, and when I go down to the South in a place like Georgia, or you go down the Midwest, there's $10 trillion of market cap in my district. Mm-hmm. Every few months, I have to name another company, Apple, Google, Intel, Yahoo. Now I have to put NVIDIA in the list. How is it that we have an economy where all of the prosperity is in a few places and so many people who have dreams of being entrepreneurs who want to get jobs in these fields are being totally left out? We've excluded the African community, the Latino community, rural communities. We have to do a far better job of giving more people pathways to prosperity in a digital economy, and we haven't done that.
I think somebody one time, it might have been you, somebody said one time, we need more than Silicon Valley, we need a Silicon Nation. And we need to expand. It's also like a scary failure mode in our economy. If a major earthquake hits the San Francisco Bay Area, it could knock off, a meaningful fraction of our U.S. economy. it's better to spread that out a little bit and move that out into a wider distribution, not only economically and socially and regionally. But I guess there is some hope, though, in some of that, because we're seeing now, after the CHIPS Act, we're seeing groundbreakings now starting on silicon fabs in this country for the first time in a long time, in places like Ohio and elsewhere. How's that looking? How's the CHIPS Act and the sort of reemergence of the hardware substrate, or the hardware stack of tech in the country right now?
Well, Rick, thanks for mentioning it. I'm biased because it's one of the things I'm proudest of in Congress of doing. I helped with Todd Young and Senator Schumer write the CHIPS Act. And I'll tell you the benefits and some of the challenges still. The benefit is, for the first time, we're bringing production back to America. We realize we can't just do the design. We've got to make these things in the United States. I think people were horrified when cars were lying on vacant lots and not being able to be sold because you didn't have a chip. And then when we invented the semiconductor chip. And to your point, Rick, on the economy, look, when Detroit did well in the past, and the automobile manufacturing sector did well, the coal towns did well back then. Youngstown did well. Now when Silicon Valley does well, I don't think it really necessarily means Youngstown does well or other places do well. We're not as connected as an economy. The CHIPS Act is trying to say, let's be more connected. And it's $20 billion into Columbus, Ohio, with these new factories. Right. Massive investment. We've got to talk about it more. I mean, the president has done more for the state of Ohio in terms of investment than probably the last 3 or 4 presidents combined.
Easily.
Just factually. But we're not getting the story. When you have Senator Vance actually saying, who cares about the Wall Street Journal? We don't care about this Vance saying, I don't care about their free market ideology. The CHIPS Act's working and we need to do more of that. And all of the Republicans, by the way, in Ohio have supported the CHIPS Act. Right. That was this president's leadership. He's actually doing what President Trump promised. He's bringing some of these jobs back. So what are the challenges? Here are the challenges. Columbus, Ohio, just candidly, they already have J.P. Morgan. They've got Ohio State. They've got these tech places. This isn't getting exactly into Lordstown. It isn't getting into Ashtabula. It isn't getting into Warren. So we've got to think about what can we be doing a modern industry in places that aren't Columbus, Ohio. And we could do clean steel there. We could do clean aluminum there. We could do a lot of things to reindustrialize America in those places that rely on technology. But I think the CHIPS Act is a good first start, and it's working.
Yeah, I think the fact that, and I don't think most Americans realize that if one organization in Taiwan called TSMC, which builds so much of technology across the globe, if they went offline, as they somewhat did it during COVID, it affects the global economy and it affects the American economy at a scale and an impact that people do not understand. Establishing the ability to do some of this manufacturing in the States is, I think it's a vital national security interest for one thing, but it also has an economic lift that I think is enormously important. So let me ask you a question about Congress, because years and years ago we had that the sort of like weird tech ignorance of the series of tubes, and last year we had is it on the Wi-Fi when we were talking about Facebook and privacy. Is Congress up to the task of taking on a lot of these big technical challenges? Because there are still a lot of guys who think their flip phone is the cutting edge of tech. I sometimes worry about that because I feel like people don't have a real grasp of even the terrain of the questions and challenges of tech in both the House and the Senate.
Rick, it's getting better, but unfortunately your criticism or your observation is correct. I said the United States Congress is about the only body that could have made Mark Zuckerberg look sympathetic. People came in with Zuckerberg and said, go get him. And then they saw the members of Congress and senators asking questions and said, God help us. We probably are better off with Zuckerberg or something. I mean, it was embarrassing. And here's the point, Rick. No one has to be a computer scientist. We don't want a Congress of computer scientists.
No, God, no.
But when people talk about the economy and they have Jamie Dimon or others come in, you may disagree with their critiques, but no one thinks they don't know what they're talking about. They may say they're ideologically opposed, but we haven't had that same sense of immersion in technology. And this is where I think having a gerontocracy, bluntly, in our Congress and Senate has made us out of touch with modern life. Like, these folks they don't do their own tweets. They're not on Facebook themselves. They're outsourced that to 30 and 40-year-old staffers. And it would be like, if you've never driven a car and you always have your staff member driving your car and you never actually had to drive it, you probably wouldn't be the best person to make the rules for the road. So the problem isn't that they don't know coding. The problem is that they aren't immersed in daily life with technology. And that's just something, I mean, there should be a boot camp of immersion to really be able to then have the ability to know who the experts are, who the people are that we should rely on. And I'll tell you, just as a representative of Silicon Valley, these tech folks, they think it's a joke. They come in, they get yelled at by members of Congress. They say, okay, we'll give them their viral clips. They'll put it on. They'll be embarrassed. And then they're like, look, they're not going to do anything. And that's been going on for 6, 7, 8 years.
I think that is a pretty persistent perception in DC. As a chief of staff to a member of Congress told me about 3 weeks ago, he's like, what am I going to do? He goes, I've got, this town has Facebook lobbyists for every conceivable member of this organization. They've got more lobbyists in this town than members of Congress. How do you think we're going to climb that hill? And it is a question I often have. It's like they realize pretty quickly how to play the system in terms of donations, lobbying, et cetera. And is Congress outgunned? Because every time, in particular, as you talked about earlier, we have a product from Meta, Instagram, which as Scott Galloway and many, many other people have written extensively about, materially causes harm, particularly to teenage girls, in terms of self-harm, in terms of self-image, in terms of anorexia, all these huge clusters of terribly consequential impacts. And it's been going on for years and years and years and years. And if this was a breakfast food causing this, we would have regulated it already. We would have taken a step already. If this was something else causing this, we would have already regulated it. Is Congress just outgunned by the lobbying community that Facebook has and the tech firms have in DC?
The lobbyists are an issue, but the bigger issue is that it hasn't reached the urgency of leadership pushing it. When leadership wants to do something, they can get it done. And that's how we got the CHIPS Act done. That's how we got infrastructure done. The president has mentioned it in 2 of his State of the Unions that we've got to regulate social media for young kids. But I think there's going to be a full focus on this to say, as you put it, our kids, 1/3 of American teenage girls are contemplating suicide at some point, not a medical condition. 1/3. That should send alarm bells in this country. Social media isn't the only cause, but it's a cause. I mean, I've been out to dinner where, family members, some girl or even boys, 15, 14, in the middle of dinner, they'll get up, they'll leave. I said, where are they going? They post an Instagram picture. I said, what is going on? How are we allowing that in this country? There are some very simple regulatory measures we can take. It should be bipartisan. And, this is something I think the president, I'm biased because I've been pushing this for 7 years, but I think the president should try to get this done, make this a huge issue. And if the Republicans oppose it, run on it in 24. But I actually think you'll get Republicans supporting some of these simple reforms.
I think that's right. I mean, I think there are people who have recognized the risk factors there. But it's just like, it's hard. DC it's a hard thing for DC to unlock an action step because there is a certain coincidence between the sort of tech bro libertarianism and free market Republicans who don't want it regulated on philosophical principles, but and so much of Silicon Valley seems immune to the market forces. Like if it was a breakfast cereal that caused teenage girls to cut themselves, at some high level, we would have banned it. It would have been the product would be anathema. It would be poison in the market. But you don't see that with things that are causing this kind of structural harm. One other big platform that I think a lot of people are concerned about, legitimately, I think, is TikTok. And TikTok seems to be like the platform from hell in a lot of ways. It's largely controlled, or at least influenced apparently by its home company, ByteDance, back in China. The algorithmic nature of it is it's consuming an enormous amount of time, effort, energy, and reshaping, a generation with this algorithmic feed. What are your thoughts on TikTok? Where's it sit in Washington these days of either regulating it, forcing a spin out, or anything like that?
There's bipartisan consensus that we should be forcing the sale or not allowing TikTok to be owned by the Chinese government. I mean, we wouldn't allow the Chinese government to own a network news station. We wouldn't allow them to be owning the New York Times. And they certainly wouldn't allow Facebook or Twitter or others to operate in China.
They don't.
It doesn't seem that this is a close call. And the danger is that you could have subtle manipulation of a lot of our young folks in terms of what they're seeing in videos. Sure. And I just don't think it's worth the risk. Why take that risk as the United States of America? So the consensus is there in Congress. I hope that the administration will take action on this and force the sale of it.
Yeah, I think that TikTok has been this sort of like an iceberg effect in the culture so far. It is providing so many hours of entertainment and content and influence on a particularly like 30 and younger cohort in our economy, in our society, in our politics, that I'm not even sure we're accurately measuring it yet. Our polling has started to try to like tease it out a little bit and dig into it a little bit, but it's still it's an enormously powerful platform without any accountability, because if there was an American version of TikTok, as you said, there's no way in hell China would allow something there that could influence that large a cohort of their population.
Absolutely. And Instagram Reels are basically taking some of TikTok, and Facebook's good at that. They took what Snapchat did and incorporated it. But you can have a lot of American tech companies take some of the basic ideas and run with it here. China did that with almost all our technology. They took all our, so I don't understand this. I don't understand why. I don't, look, I'm very sensitive as an Asian American. If you told me like ban people from China from coming to America, I'd say, no, that's xenophobic. Banning TikTok is not in any way xenophobic. That's basically protecting the sovereignty of a country from meddling on our information sources from a foreign power. And I think it's a very reasonable policy.
Well, I think TikTok's going to be probably a bigger fight than Meta or Twitter or anything else in the coming years, because it's still growing. Its influence is enormous, and thank you for keeping an eye on it in Congress. Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you so much for joining us today on the Enemies List. How can people find you on social media?
Well, I appreciate it. I'm at Ro Khanna on Twitter, on Facebook, and appreciate your voice, Rick. And I appreciate, you've been one of the leading people, of course, against Trumpism, but I appreciate in particular your thought on these issues, because in my view, after we defeat Trump, whatever comes beyond, if we don't address these underlying issues, we're going to remain a deeply polarized country. And it's really addressing these structural issues to try to bring us together after the mess with Trumpism.
Yeah, it's going to be a long road, my friend. Well, thank you again, Ro, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon. On today's Enemies List is Tommy Tuberville. Now, Tommy Tuberville is from Alabama. He's a former football coach. He spent some time darkening the door of the University of Miami back in the day in Florida, but now he is a U.S. Senator from the sometimes great state of Alabama. Although he is currently embarrassing himself, the nation, and of course the state of Alabama, he's holding up military promotions across the board, but particularly for the Marine Corps. Tommy Tuberville is a small man with a big mouth, and he's decided he's going to freeze promotions in the Marine Corps until the Department of Defense follows along on a whole bunch of petty little bullshit political positions he has, many of which involve choice. But it's well beyond that. It's the amorphous wokeism game that these guys like to play these days. Tommy Tuberville doing this does not help the U.S. It doesn't help America at all. It helps Xi and China. It helps ISIS. It helps Vladimir Putin, because what he's doing is crippling the Marine Corps. People who should be promoted into jobs are not leaving. People who are timing out on their retirements are leaving. He's leaving many, many jobs in the Marine Corps unfilled, and including the commandant of the Marine Corps. So if you're a Tommy Tuberville constituent in the great state of Alabama, you might want to tell him he's on the enemies list. Thanks again for listening to The Enemies List. If you have any comments, questions, or if there's someone you'd like to hear on the podcast, hit me up on Twitter at @TheRickWilson. Thanks again for the wonderful support you've shown the pod. We're growing fast. It really helps if you will share this with your friends, your family, and anyone else who, like us, is trying to save democracy. While you're at it, if you could rate and review the podcast, I would be very much appreciative. I know this is the sort of thing you've heard a billion times. Please rate, review, like, blah, blah, blah. But you need to do it. It really does help us a lot. We are slaves to the algorithm, my friends, and if you do this, it will help get the pod out further. Anyway, thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time, and remember, whatever you do, stay off the list.